Hi, I'm Jeff Sharon from UCF Sports Night. You can now watch UCF TV 24 hours a day on Bright House Digital Channel 1.
Hello and welcome to the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Bersia, Special Assistant to the President for Global Perspectives at UCF. Our guest today is Naomi Tutu, world-renowned human rights activist and educator. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your story, how you came to the United States and some of your experiences growing up in South Africa under apartheid.
Well, I mean, I came to the U.S. in 1978 to come to college. I grew up mostly in South Africa, though had spent time in the United Kingdom when my father was in school and then working for the World Council of Churches there. But one of the things that my parents had originally been teachers, in fact, and left teaching when Bantu education was introduced in South Africa. And one of their pledges to one another was that they were going to try to make sure that their children didn't have to go through Bantu education. And so when we lived in South Africa, I was in boarding schools in Swaziland. And so once I was looking for tertiary education, I was interested in the U.S. because I'd never been here, and it seemed like an interesting place, and had grown up particularly with the civil rights movement as a kind of a model for our struggle in South Africa, and grown up with having as heroes people like Martin Luther King Jr., like Malcolm X. So was very interested in being here and being, I thought, maybe still a part of that movement that I saw as connected with ours. But because of the cost of a U.S. education, ended up at Berea College in Kentucky, which is an amazing institution that was founded around interracial education, but also around education for those who could not afford tertiary education. And so went to a college that where nobody pays tuition. And in fact, all students work for the college. And had a number of shocks on arriving here. The biggest, I think, was how little people in the U.S. knew about the rest of the world.
Has it changed much since then?
I'm surprised how little that has changed. You know, that I have a daughter in college, and she talks about people saying to her, "Oh, so do you speak African?" And she always tells me that because she knows that's one of my pet peeves, that there's no such language as African. You know, it's a continent and not and the ideas that people have about the rest of the world. I think there are more young people from the U.S. who have traveled around the world, but I still run into people who have very little idea about life for other people around the world, very little idea about the range of experience, very little idea about the number of languages that are out there. So, I mean, I remember when I was in college that one of my good friends in college was from Liberia, and being asked by people over and over, Antoinette and I would be asked, "Oh, so did you know each other before you came to Kentucky?" And well, Antoinette was somebody who had her own sense of humor, and she'd say, "Oh yes, Naomi would walk up from South Africa to Liberia every morning to pick me up on the way to school." Like, no, we didn't know each other. Liberia, South Africa, big space in between.
Could you tell us a little bit about what it was like under apartheid? Many of our viewers probably have little knowledge of that experience, especially the younger ones. It's just part of their history text. But if you could explain to us just how difficult life was then.
You know, I always say to people that I don't think that you can imagine what it means to have your life determined from the moment you were born. That as soon as you were born, you had to be registered in South Africa, and part of the registration was your racial classification. And once that classification was in the book, that determined where you lived, where you could go to school, what type of education you would receive, what jobs you would be eligible to have. Because under apartheid, we had the Job Reservation Act that that reserved specific jobs for white South Africans, and those were the so-called professional jobs. That, you know, when I was growing up, an African could not be a long-distance bus driver or a long-haul truck driver, that those were professional jobs that only white people could hold. That at the age of 16, as an African from an urban community, you had to go and register and get the passbook, which then stated where you were allowed to be. And I remember going with my parents. We lived in the Eastern Cape, and my parents were both from Krugersdorp, and going with them from the Eastern Cape to Krugersdorp to visit my grandparents, and my parents having to register as they arrived in the town that they had grown up in as alien, as visiting Africans, that they would have to go to the police station because they did not have the right to be in that town, even though that was their home. Of the long trips for us going from the Eastern Cape to Swaziland to boarding school, and the gas stations, garages we call them, that we would stop at to put gas in the car, and they would not allow us to use their bathrooms. Of stopping at shops to buy food and not being allowed to walk into the shop, that Africans would have to go to the back to a window and not be able to select what it was you wanted, to take what was given to you. So, you know, the experience of basically an experience of a system that tried to make you believe that you were less than because you were African, because you were black. You know, so on the one hand, that's what I remember of growing up under apartheid. On the other hand, I remember a community of my parents, my grandparents, teachers, community activists who kept on saying to us that this is not who you are, and that we know there is a greatness in you, and it doesn't matter what this system tells you, that we want you to grow into that greatness. And struggling, really growing up, struggling to believe this message that you are getting from these people, while at the same time, this is constant. The message, you know, you're out with your parents and they're stopped by the police and made to produce their pass, and so trying so desperately to hold on to that belief that this system is not what is determining who I am, that I know.
But how did you do it? Your father, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, is one of the most optimistic people I've ever met. How did he maintain his optimism during that period?
You know, what he says is that one of the things that really sustained him was the knowledge of the prayers and support of people around the world. And he tells a number of stories, and the one is of an anchorite in California who told him that she woke up at 3 o'clock each morning to pray for him by name and for South Africa in general, and that he would say, you know, how can I not believe in a world that believes in justice when I have somebody on the other side of the planet waking up to pray for me at 3 in the morning. And I do think that for any people in a time of oppression, in a place of oppression, the knowledge that there are people around the world who are listening to your story and who really believe that your freedom is part of their freedom is what sustained us, and I think is what sustains people around the world. I mean, this summer was at a Peace Jam event in Los Angeles, and there was a young woman from Burma who came to talk about the experience, and particularly in light of the crackdown that had happened. And the thing that she kept saying was knowing that there are people out there who know our story, who are telling our story, who are sending us support, emotional as well as practical support. That is what sustains us. And I know that from our struggle against apartheid, how true that is, that the voices, the prayers, the support of people around the world is instrumental in allowing you to hold on to the knowledge that the truth will prevail.
When did you realize that you wanted to be part of the story of human rights and the human struggle? Did it just come to you one day, or?
I really don't know when I realized that that's what I wanted to be. I think, again, being in the family that I was in, having the opportunities that I had to meet amazing people who were involved in struggles for human rights around the world, and getting to know that these are human beings. I think that one of the things that so very often happens is that we see these icons, the people who are in the struggle, and we think, oh, that has to be an amazing person. That could never be me. And having the opportunity, for instance, to sit with Betty Williams and see her act silly, and that you think, okay, these are human beings. And hearing them talk about when they have felt at their lowest and have wondered whether what they are doing is ever going to make a difference, that for me was also empowering to realize that. So it's not about being a super person. It's not about being a superwoman or a superman, knowing always that what you are doing is wonderful and is right, and that everything is always going to work out, and knowing that in those times of darkness there is a community that you can turn to, and so I found myself on that path, and involved in issues. For me, it did start around the issue the issues of racism and sexism, and growing up seeing how all of these isms are connected, and that if you are going to be involved in the struggle against racism, then you cannot avoid being in the struggle against homophobia. You cannot avoid being in the struggle against ethnocentrism, that you cannot avoid being in the struggle against sexism.
So today, as you look out at the world, in some respects it has changed, it has improved. South Africa is in a better place than it was before, but we still have major issues in the human rights realm. What would you say are three of the worst problems that you can identify out there, and how might people do something to help address them?
Well, I think that one is the number of human beings who still do not have basic needs met: clean water, shelter, adequate supplies of food. That we have a world that can actually feed, clothe, house, give clean water to every single person on this planet. We have the capability. We have the resources. What we don't have is the will to believe that this is what we want to do as the human family, and that for me is one of the major things, that we need to find a way to know that this is what we have to do, that any child born into this human family has the right to those basic necessities, that we should not still in this day and age have children who live in hunger, and for me, you can say that we look around the world, but for me, one of the most disturbing things is that in this country, we don't have to go into developing nations. That in this country, we have thousands of children who go to bed hungry every day. children who are sleeping on the streets or in cars with their families. That how can we in the 21st century still be at that place? So that's one for me, is basic human needs. The other is, as I said, around the issue of gender empowerment, that I really do believe that as long as women are not afforded equality around the world, then many of the other issues that we face will never be dealt with. That that until we know that every girl child has the same rights as every boy child born, that we will never have a truly healthy and strong world community. So and you know and in basic things like access to education, access to healthcare, but also what comes out of that is the whole issue of violence against women, and that again, it's something that for me is amazing that again in the 21st century that it is still acceptable in much of the world. Violence against women is acceptable. And that cannot be. That cannot be, and that in fact, in many places, we are moving to where rape is seen as an instrument of war. That we see people trying to have a discussion about female genital mutilation as though it's some cultural. Something cultural that we cannot simply condemn it because it's a cultural thing, and I've always loved the human rights cultural construct that Judge Albie Sachs from South Africa has always spoken about, that your culture and your human rights stops where it starts hitting my nose, and that so that any time that there is something that is cultural that entails violence against somebody, then you cannot use culture as an okay for that. So that would be my and I'm not sure that I'm putting them in the order of importance, but and then health. That there's the healthcare debate in this country, which is one level, which and again I'm always astounded. I say, how can we be the richest nation in the world and have people worried about getting sick, that being sick might mean losing your home? That does not make sense. But that then also looking globally, that looking at the impact of the AIDS pandemic in Africa, looking at the fact that we have so many diseases that we do know how to prevent and cure, and yet are not being prevented and cured around the world.
Where do you feel there's the potential for some kind of breakthrough in dealing with these various challenges? Do you think that we're on the verge of rising collectively to address them, or where are we?
I think so. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks that our world is in such crisis at this point, economically, environmentally. I mean, you name it. We just seem to be on the brink. That I believe that very crisis is the opportunity for us to say, well, all the things we've tried so far have not made us secure, wealthy, safe, whatever, that we now, and that this might be the opportunity to say, let's look at this from the bottom once again. How are we going to change this? And I have to say that being around young people, I was this weekend I was at a Peace Jam event in Denver, and being around young people who and hearing them know that they are part of a world community, that they might be from Denver, they might identify as Denverites, Colorado, American, but that they also identify themselves as part of the global community, and that that they are intent on making a difference in Denver and a difference in the world. And I find that everywhere I go, that there are these young people who believe that they have the responsibility to make a difference where they are, and that responsibility is a global one. So in that way, I'm hopeful.
We've definitely seen that here in terms of environmental consciousness, and then during the recent election, students turned out in record numbers, registered and voted, which is terrific. But speaking of that, what was your reaction to the U.S. presidential election, and what potential do you think that holds as we're looking to the future, and in particular dealing with some of the challenges you've outlined?
Well, I mean, for me, it was an amazing experience. I was at a panel in Nashville soon after it, and I said, you know, I think that I must be a historic individual myself, because I think I must be one of the few people who had the opportunity to vote for Nelson Mandela at our first democratic election, and then to have the opportunity to vote for President-elect Obama in this country, and the feelings were very similar, and in fact, I was woken up by people in South Africa to remind me to go and vote. You know, they really thought that I was going to forget if they didn't call, but that, you know, that the idea that this election was not simply a U.S. election, but that it was an election about the hope that President-elect Obama spoke about for this country is a feeling that carries around the world, the hope for change, for a new way of doing relations, not just in the U.S., but doing relations with the rest of the world. And I think that you know, there's the caveat that this is one human being, you know, so people please don't put on him that he's going to save the world, but still the idea that it's a new way of thinking about what it means to be a powerful nation, what it means to be the most powerful nation in the world. That and the excitement that I got from people in South Africa around the election was just that the U.S. would be truly living up to who the U.S. has been hoped to be in the world, as a leader in changing the way we interact with one another and with our planet. That we see the connections between human beings, between the rest of creation, between the struggles that people in the U.S. are facing and the struggles that people are facing around the world. And I really do have the hope that one of the big changes would be a willingness to listen. A willingness to listen, that as a leading nation, that it is very easy to simply be the one who says this is what has to happen, and go ahead and do it, and that there aren't many people who can stop us, but that the more powerful thing is to listen to voices from around the world, and then to make decisions based on an input that reflects the breadth of experience from around the world.
When you think in terms of actions or gestures that the president-elect might make early on to move things in the direction you just described, what kinds of things do you think he might do or say in the first 100 days?
Well, I do think that one of the things that needs definitely to be said is around the issue of torture. That we have had such like a play on words about something that is so awful, around what does the U.S. really believe about torture? What is this administration's policy around torture? So I think that one of the first statements that I would love to hear is that under no circumstances is the U.S. going to be a country that allows, encourages, condones torture. And I guess a kind of a parallel to that is again the issue of Guantanamo, the people who are being held in Guantanamo. That my dream is that it would be closed very quickly, and I think that would make a statement to the world that that the U.S. really does see itself as part of the world community, not above international laws, but one of those places that is going to be a beacon for showing the importance of international laws and ways of acting.
And what is next for you, Naomi Tutu? Obviously, there's much work to be done in the human rights field, but is there anything political in your future? Or?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Apart from my continuing work around diversity and my sense that the model of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is one that I would like to spread around the world as a way of healing from many different wounds.
So you're going to continue speaking and speaking out and consulting and you visit primarily colleges or a combination of colleges and
colleges, professional organizations, communities. I've done some work for different cities around issues of healing, church groups. So I'm all over the place. So
you have a book coming out at some point.
I have a book called "I Don't Think of You as Black," which is about honest conversations on race and racism. And
I think we'll be able to discuss that on our next show.
Next time.
So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Bersia, and we'll see you next time.